everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well, and you're going to see it right there. Day 6, Day 7. We call it the potential for Day 7, of course, being subsequent to the Day 6 event here. But the Day 6 event now, as you can see here, is now at an enhanced risk. To put into perspective for you how rare this is actually the 8th time in recorded history for the Storm Prediction Center where they've issued this. This doesn't get issued unless they have good confidence that a very powerful storm system could come through that has a high ceiling for severe weather potential. Keep in mind that even though this is a 30% area and there's a lot of confidence, there's still chances that this may not end up verifying at all. There's a chance that this can still get downgraded. So first things first, always want to make sure that we aren't spreading panic here. But nonetheless, though, the ceiling is high for this event. And what I mean by ceiling is this storm system does have a lot of potential. So we don't need to downplay that either. Especially considering the fact that when I read through this synopsis today, I find it very interesting that the Storm Prediction Center is bringing up the potential for all hazards, including strong tornadoes. Now, given what we were looking at off the models yesterday, it's not surprising that they would have that wording in there. And then on top of that, when we look at the models in just a second here, you'll kind of see a little bit more of what I'm talking about because there have been some changes there. Now, in regards to the Day 7 event, there are a lot of questions with that, especially in my opinion. We're still going to have a pretty stout moist sector. No real need to even talk about the moist and warm sectors here because not much has really changed there. Both are looking very stout and nothing is really downtrended there. So we're going to kind of be putting a lot more focus on the wind profile. But the timing of this, if this happens, let's say earlier into the morning or maybe mid-morning, I think the threat may be a little less significant. If this were to linger a little bit and take its time heading into, like, let's say the early afternoon, especially as we get towards central Georgia and over towards the Carolinas per se, show the Day 7 risk right here. I do think that everything could be on the table once more, but we'll have to see how things pan out with that because it's in this case it's kind of the tale of two models. Euro shows this coming in a little later in the day, whereas GFS has this as like an early morning, maybe late morning event, depending on where you are. Really, a lot of this may even start in the overnight hours of Tuesday, which would be March the 4th. So let's go ahead and get into those models here. Like I said, a lot has really changed with this setup here. And I was kind of looking at it before I started the video here. But look at how stout this trough has gotten. It's really well amplified in the upper levels, especially as we get into the early part of the 4th here. This is, by the way, our Day 6 outlook again. And by the time we get later into the evening, look at how everything's amped up here. Another thing that I meant to make note of when we were looking on that last screen is this area over here towards Missouri, maybe even over towards St. Louis, this area has not ended up under a slight risk yet. It's a cold core setup, but it looks like it's a pretty prominent one, I would go as far as to say. So I do think that this area could end up under a slight risk too. So if you're over towards St. Louis and areas further off towards the south, getting close to that Arkansas border, you might be under the gun for severe weather as well. I would even go as far as to not rule out parts of extreme southern Illinois, maybe even eastern parts of Kentucky, or western parts of Kentucky, excuse me. So definitely need to be on the lookout for severe weather, but our most dangerous weather undoubtedly seems like it's going to be over towards the Mississippi Delta. We've talked about it a lot. It's not really a surprise that we're seeing the uptrend that we're seeing over there in regards to the hazards right now. But I think anywhere along, and I'm going to try to draw this one for you, somewhere along this corridor here might be our point of interest in regards to our tornado threat. This could shift a little bit further off towards the north. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it did, considering what we're seeing just off this map alone here. It could maybe go all the way up towards potentially even central parts of Mississippi. Alabama, I haven't forgotten about you. You're still in there as well. Timing, I think, is going to be a key factor to this, but One thing about it is, and the one question that I still have, and this is due in large part to the fact that we have the global models, is the amount of instability that will be available. Global models often end up downplaying the amount of instability. We don't really get a good idea of what's really available until we get to the convective models, which is usually about 48 to 60 hours out. Considering the fact that we're still at 135 hours out, we're going to be waiting a little bit before we get to that point. Let's keep this rolling here into the following day here. This is getting into the 5th. As you can see, the GFS is showing a scenario where we end up having an early morning event towards Georgia. And then in the Carolinas, you end up getting an early afternoon event potentially before this moves out. Now, like I said, timing is really going to be the key factor in all of this. So the thing with the GFS is it seems like the trough still holds itself together pretty well. So even if this ended up being an overnight event for Georgia, it still have a pretty prominent threat of severe weather. I do think that if this does play out, though, you're going to be leaning more into damaging winds versus tornadoes. Although I would still say that all three hazards would be possible at this point. As we get over towards the Carolinas, I do think that there's more potential for prefrontal cells and such. Of course, as we watch this move out, we'll see the weather begin to calm down and cool down comes in behind that. So let's go ahead and shift back towards the 4th again. We're looking towards the mid levels of the atmosphere this time. Looking at the short waves that we were talking about yesterday, these short waves are coming up a little bit earlier in the day now, especially over towards Arkansas, so we could have an earlier start time to the severe weather, whereas before we were kind of uncertain about it. This could be an early to mid-afternoon event over towards Arkansas, and it stretches off to the east. The progression that we're also seeing with the GFS is a little bit more aggressive than what we've been seeing with the Euro. So as a result, I do think that that earlier start time could result in a longer window for severe weather. Like I said, given the warm air that we have available along with the moisture available too, I think at any point, as long as we can get something to get those storms to fire off, any sort of trigger like the shortwave, for example, which is a great point of lift, that's exactly what we would be looking for to get things started. And once we get rolling, it's more than likely that we would keep rolling from that point. It's kind of got that snowball effect look to it. So let's go ahead and actually take a look now at the low-level jet. We talked about speed and directional shear yesterday, but in particular, there's always one thing that I'm always on watch for when it comes to severe weather events that I also think is the reason why the Storm Prediction Center highlighted the threat for strong tornadoes. Not only do we have a strong low-level jet, but also look at the direction that we're seeing here. We're seeing that south to north motion that you often will try to look for when it comes to these severe weather events here. Usually when I've seen outbreaks off towards the deep south, they've often had a lot of low level flow here coming from the south heading north, almost completely north. So with that and the low level jet nearing 60 plus knots, that does lead me to have some concerns myself. Like I said, there's a lot of reason why this event could fail, but if it does not, we might have a bit of a situation on our hands in regards to the weather here. So this is why I'm preaching to you now. Make sure that you are staying weather aware. Events like these, if they do occur, often can be pretty significant. And we still have a pretty prominent low-level jet as we head into the following day here too. I do think that we lose some of the dynamics, but we still have enough to where we could get some strong damaging winds and a few tornadoes out of this as well. So that being said, like I said, if you're anywhere from Texas all the way over to the Carolinas and Virginia, and of course we can't forget areas as far north as Tennessee, parts of Missouri, southern parts of Illinois, maybe even Kentucky as well, you're going to need to be on the lookout for severe weather at this point. The further south you are, the higher the likelihood, I would go as far as to say. Now, as I mentioned before, moist sectors there, we're not going to really do too much in the way of harping over this, considering the fact that we already know our 60-degree dew points are going to be in abundance. Front passes through a little bit later in the day from the looks of it here too, so that moisture is still going to be very much available as we head into parts of Georgia and the Carolinas here towards Virginia, we still have a little bit of a moisture nose that pops up here as well. So again, definitely something that we need to keep an eye out for. So also temperatures, not really much of a surprise. We already know that we're going to have an abundant warm sector. Notice that before this, we do have this little trough that sneaks into the east here for a minute. And then after that, it really helps kind of set the stage for this event too. And then you can see the frontal boundary that is also following this setup here that's subsequent to the event. This is going to also cause a dramatic drop in temperatures over the course of the following days here over the next week. But seeing that gradient that we saw beforehand is also going to be a big factor as to why we see the action that we're going to end up seeing, or that we could end up seeing. Like I said, this isn't a shoe in. I have to remind myself of that too. But that being said here, this is the only piece that we're going to have the euro up for here. But even so, it's almost kind of a moot point, because truthfully, if we go ahead and look at this preset map as we head towards the 3rd and the 4th, look what ends up happening. Look how quickly things end up happening. By the time we get into the early afternoon hours, and one thing about the euro is it's a high-res euro, so it usually does a better job of picking up on additional storms out ahead of the main front. What you're seeing on the GFS here is the main front. And what you'll notice here is, even though we do have a big line of storms, more than likely we're going to have prefrontal cells with this. Now, of course, there are a lot of questions left unanswered with this that could inhibit that. But the fact of the matter is, I do expect to see maybe a couple of tornadoes from this. It could go the other way where it's an entire outbreak. But like I said, as of right now, a lot more questions than there are answers at this point. Also wanted to make sure that I made note of that cold core setup that we're seeing over here towards Missouri, especially over towards St. Louis, starting to pop up on models more. So I do think it's only a matter of time before we end up seeing a severe risk issued for the region here, before we get into that day 3 time frame here. Then as we continue to go forward, we see that line of storms progressing to the deep south. We see a little bit of resurgence as we get into the early afternoon for the region, and then we watch this head out. And then from that point, we're good for the most part all the way up until we get towards the 13th, where we see another stout looking storm system take shape here once again. Now keep in mind, nothing set in stone, but definitely something else we're going to have to keep watch of over the course of the coming weeks as well. So March is looking like it's coming in strong here. Make sure you guys are staying weather aware. I'll be here, of course, to put out videos on any major changes that may come in the days and weeks ahead here. But that's all I got for you guys. We'll have the final March outlook up tomorrow. Make sure you stay tuned for that and any other future severe weather updates. Till then, Metalhead Weatherman signing out. Have a nice rest of your day.